The hiss of a 32-ounce tomahawk steak hitting a searing hot plate was the only sound that could cut through the tension in the private dining room. Julian Croft, third-generation titan of Crofter Industries, heard nothing. He was staring at a tablet, its screen displaying a series of symbols that might as well have been etched by aliens. This was it. The key to saving his family's century-old manufacturing empire from the circling vultures of the tech world, and it was written in a language that his entire retinue of MIT-educated engineers and high-priced consultants had declared indecipherable. As the legacy of his father and grandfather crumbled before his eyes, he lashed out at the only person in the room he hadn't truly seen. The waitress. "You!" he snarled, his voice a low growl of pure frustration. He gestured dismissively with the tablet. "I bet you can't make sense of this. Can you even read the wine list?" He was about to make the most colossal miscalculation of his life. Because he hadn't just insulted a waitress, he had just challenged the last living guardian of a forgotten art. The Forge wasn't merely a restaurant, it was a cathedral of Chicago industry, a testament to old money and hardened power. Located in a converted steel mill in the West Loop, its exposed brick walls were hung with abstract paintings worth more than most suburban homes. Its patrons weren't people. They were legacies, private equity firms and political dynasties in bespoke suits. And serving them, 5 nights a week, was Clara Hadid. To them, she was a function, not a person. A pair of hands that delivered their old fashions with a single perfect ice sphere, that cleared away the bones of their dry-aged porterhouse, and that never, ever held their gaze for a second longer than necessary. Her uniform, a simple, tailored black dress with a leather apron, was designed for anonymity. It was the perfect camouflage. Clara was 24, but the bone-deep weariness from pulling double shifts to cover her grandfather's mountain of medical debt made her feel ancient. Each night, after the last customer had gone, she'd ride the L train back to a cramped apartment in Pilsen, her feet throbbing, the ghost of hickory smoke and expensive bourbon clinging to her hair. In that apartment, tucked away in a worn leather satchel under her bed, were her grandfather's tools. Not wrenches and screwdrivers, but delicate hammers, chasing tools and gravers, each one worn smooth by the hands of generations of Hadid metalsmiths. Alongside them lay his journals, filled with the same strange, angular script that now held Julian Croft's future hostage. Her grandfather, a master craftsman from a lineage stretching back to the Levant, had called it Gileadite Aramaic, a dialect kept alive for 2 millennia solely by his family line to protect their unique metallurgical formulas. It was the language of the forge, of fire and metal. He had been teaching it to her since she was a little girl, not in a classroom, but in the heat and clang of his workshop. "It is not just words, Habibti," he would say, his voice a warm rumble over the hiss of the quenching bucket. "It is a recipe. It is our soul. You do not read it. You feel it." But academics and tradition didn't pay for chemotherapy. They didn't stop the bank from foreclosing on the workshop after the fire that had taken his strength and, eventually, his life. So, Clara Hadid, the apprentice artisan, had vanished, and Clara, the waitress, was born. She knew the regulars. There was the real estate developer who always complained his steak was a degree too rare, a power play to get it comped. There was the young crypto billionaire who ate with one hand while scrolling through market charts on his phone with the other. And then there was Julian Croft. Croft was different. He wasn't a shark in the same way as the others. He was a lion, an aging king of a dwindling pride. He owned factories that had built parts for the Hoover Dam, for the Apollo missions. But now, in an age of composites and 3D printing, Croft Industries, with its legacy of steel and iron, was seen as a dinosaur. He was a man drowning in the weight of his own history. He treated the staff with a distracted indifference, a man too consumed by his own problems to notice the world around him. Clara felt a strange, quiet pity for him. He was a builder in a world of breakers, a craftsman in an age of coders. Tonight he was in the most exclusive room, the Crucible, set behind a wall of smoked glass. He was hosting Marcus Thorne, and the restaurant's general manager, a perpetually anxious man named David, had been vibrating with nervous energy all day. "This is the night, Clara," David had whispered during the pre-shift briefing, wringing his hands. "Mr. Croft is trying to fend off a hostile takeover from Thorne. Everything has to be flawless. Be a ghost. A perfect, silent ghost." Clara had nodded, her face a practiced mask of neutrality. She knew Marcus Thorne by reputation, knew money, a tech mogul who had made his fortune in software and now saw manufacturing as a quaint relic to be bought, gutted for patents, and sold for parts. He was everything her grandfather had despised, a man who created nothing tangible, who profited from the dismantling of things others had built. As Clara balanced a tray with 2 glasses of Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old, she had no idea that her 2 lives, the invisible waitress and the keeper of an ancient flame, were about to be fused together in the fiery crucible of a corporate showdown. The air inside the crucible was thick with the metallic tang of unspoken aggression. The appetizers sat cold and untouched. Julian Croft was on his feet, his tie loosened, his custom suit jacket slung carelessly over the back of his chair. Across from him, Marcus Thorne sat with a predatory stillness, a faint, smug smile playing on his lips. "It's simple, Julian," Thorne said, his voice smooth and condescending. "Your company is a relic. Your profit margins are shrinking. Your infrastructure is aging. I'm offering you a lifeline, a merger, my software, my logistics, my capital. We integrate, we streamline, we become the future." "Streamline?" Croft's voice was rough with contempt. "You mean fire half my workforce, people who have been with my family for generations. You mean close the plants my grandfather built with his own hands." "I mean progress," Thorne countered, tapping a long, manicured finger on the tablet that lay between them. "And speaking of progress, this is the other part of the deal. My R&D team acquired this during some due diligence on a defunct mining operation in Jordan. It's a metallurgist's journal of some kind. Our spectroanalysis of the fragments attached to the original tablet suggests an alloy with properties that are, frankly, impossible. Lighter than aluminum, stronger than titanium. But, as you can see, we can't read the damn thing. No one can. We've had it looked at by every university, every expert." He slid the tablet toward Croft. "The deal is this. You accept my merger offer. In return, I give you a 5% stake in the new company and the honor of being the one to crack this code. Your old world metallurgists can work with my new world engineers. It's a generous offer. It lets you save face." It was a public execution disguised as a partnership. Thorne was offering to let Croft be a glorified foreman in his own dismantled kingdom, all for a puzzle box he couldn't open himself. "And if I say no?" Croft asked, his jaw tight. Thorne's smile widened. "If you say no, I leak your 3rd quarter earnings report tomorrow morning. The one that shows you're on the verge of defaulting on your union pension obligations. Your stock will crater, your board will oust you, and I'll buy what's left of Croft Industries for 10 cents on the dollar at a bankruptcy auction. Either way, Julian, I get the company. This way, you just get to keep a little dignity." It was a checkmate, a brutal, elegant trap. And it was at this exact moment of suffocating pressure that the door to the crucible slid open. Clara Hadid stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with their bourbon. She moved with her practiced silence, her eyes downcast, heading for the table. But she couldn't help but see the tablet screen, the angular, geometric script, the familiar flow of the characters that were as much a part of her as her own DNA. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just Gileadite Aramaic. It was her great-great-grandfather's specific hand. She recognized a particular flourish on the symbol for smelting. Croft, sensing a disturbance, whirled around. His eyes, grey and stormy, landed on her. He was a cornered animal looking for anything, anyone, to tear into. It was then he delivered the line, the sneering, dismissive insult born of pure despair. "You, I bet you can't make sense of this. Can you even read the wine list?" Marcus Thorne chuckled, a low, cruel sound. "Leave her be, Julian. She's just here to pour the drinks." Clara stopped. Her hand, the one holding the heavy silver tray, was perfectly steady. The years of swallowing her pride, the endless nights of aching feet, the grief for her grandfather, and the legacy she thought was lost forever. It all coalesced into a single point of white-hot clarity. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a Hadid. She turned, her spine, usually curved in a posture of deference, straightening to its full height. For the first time, she looked directly into Julian Croft's eyes. "Ashan al-Habazal," she said, her voice not loud, but clear and resonant, cutting through the oppressive silence of the room. The smoke tells the story of the steel. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It pressed in on them, sucking the air from the room. Julian Croft stared, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Marcus Thorne's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the shift. The power in the room had just tilted on its axis. "What? What did you say?" Croft stammered, his voice dropping from a roar to a whisper. "I translated the title of the first chapter," Clara replied, her English now as crisp and cool as her Aramaic had been ancient and warm. She placed the tray of bourbon on a sideboard with a soft, deliberate click. "It's a proverb. It means the quality of the process is revealed in the final product." She walked toward the table, the soft soles of her work shoes making no sound on the polished concrete floor. "And I can read the rest of it too." She gestured at the tablet. Thorne recovered first, letting out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, this is rich. Julian, is this a prank? Did you hire an actress to throw me off my game? Very clever." "Mr. Croft," Clara said, ignoring Thorne completely, her gaze locked on the older man. "My name is Clara Hadid. For the last 3 years I've served you your steak, medium rare, with a side of grilled asparagus. You have approximately 12 hours until the markets open, and Mr. Thorne guts your company. You don't have time for a prank. And frankly," she added, a flicker of cold fire in her eyes, "neither do I." The sheer, unvarnished audacity of her statement shocked Julian Croft out of his stupor. He was a man who had built his life on judging the quality of steel, on sensing fissures and weaknesses invisible to the naked eye. He looked at this young woman, at her steady hands, not soft and delicate, but with the faint, smoothed-over calluses of a worker. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but underneath it, something hard and unbreakable, something that reminded him of his own grandfather. He made a decision based on a lifetime of instinct. "Thorne," he said, turning to his rival, "get out." "What? You heard me. Get out of my restaurant. The deal is off." "Julian, you're committing corporate suicide," Thorne sputtered, rising to his feet. "Over some Waitress's party trick?" "We'll see," Croft said, his voice now calm, imbued with a sliver of hope he hadn't felt in years. He pressed a button on the wall. "David, please escort Mr. Thorne from the premises." Thorne stared, his face turning a blotchy red. He looked from Croft to Clara and back again, utterly baffled. He snatched the tablet from the table. "Fine, self-destruct. I'll be waiting with my checkbook." He stormed out of the room, leaving a quivering silence in his wake. Croft turned back to Clara. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The cheap but immaculate uniform, the worn shoes, the brilliant, tired eyes. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair Thorne had just vacated. Clara didn't hesitate. She sat, pulling the chair in with a quiet confidence. Croft sat opposite her, where he'd been moments before. But the dynamic was entirely changed. He was no longer the host. He was the supplicant. "He took the tablet," Croft said, the reality of his gamble sinking in. "It doesn't matter," Clara said. "I've seen enough. And besides, that tablet is a copy. The original isn't a scroll. It's a sheet of metal, isn't it? Hammered thin, the characters punched in with a stylus." Croft's eyes widened. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because that's how my family has recorded our knowledge for 2,000 years, she said. She reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out a small, dark metal pendant on a simple leather cord. It was hammered into a unique, almost leaf-like shape, and covered in the same tiny, angular script. "My name is Hadid. In my language, it means smith. The script on that tablet is a dialect of Aramaic spoken only by my ancestors. It was created to protect our formulas for creating alloys the world has never seen. That's not just a journal you were looking at, Mr. Croft. That is my family's legacy, and Mr. Thorne stole it." The name Hadid hung in the air. Julian Croft, a student of industrial history, felt a jolt of recognition. The Hadids of Damascus, the legendary metalsmiths. I thought they were wiped out during the war. "The wars took many," Clara said, her voice softening with a deep, ancestral sadness. "My grandfather was the last who escaped. He came to this country with nothing but his tools and his knowledge. He tried to rebuild, to start a workshop here in Chicago." She looked down at her hands. "There was a fire, an electrical fault, they said. It destroyed everything. His journals, his work, his health. He died last year, buried in debt. I've been working here ever since to pay it off." She finally looked up, and the grief in her eyes had been replaced by a resolve as hard as tempered steel. "That tablet Thorne has. It must be a page from one of the few journals that survived, one he must have sold for a pittance when the medical bills started piling up. Thorne didn't acquire it in due diligence. He bought a stolen piece of my family's soul." Croft was silent for a long moment, processing the incredible story. This wasn't a random coincidence. It was a collision of histories, a convergence of legacies. He had spent his life trying to uphold his grandfather's heritage, and sitting across from him was a young woman who had lost everything but her own. His initial skepticism, the cynical defense mechanism of a man constantly under siege, began to melt away, replaced by a growing sense of awe and a nascent, unfamiliar feeling. Trust. "What does it say?" he asked, his voice now devoid of any arrogance, filled only with genuine curiosity. "The formula. What is it?" Clara leaned forward, her eyes focused on a distant point, as if reading the script in the air in front of her. "It's not one formula, it's a process, a 7-stage process for creating a ferrous alloy with a crystalline carbon structure. It starts with—" She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. She picked up a linen napkin and a pen from the table. The language doesn't have a direct word for the elements. It speaks in metaphor. It describes the tears of the mountain. That would be iron ore, but with a high level of nickel content, and the breath of the sleeping stone. That's coal, but specifically anthracite, for a clean, high-temperature burn. Then it describes, adding, the dragon's tooth. The dragon's tooth? Croft repeated, leaning in, mesmerized. A catalyst, a mineral. I don't know the English word for it. My grandfather just called it Shinan Tura. He said it was the key. It forces the carbon to align in a lattice structure during the quenching process. She began to sketch on the napkin, not chemical symbols, but the Aramaic characters, her hand moving with an innate, practiced grace. The doodles she made on her break, the subconscious practice of a lifetime, were now flowing from her with purpose. It's a recipe, she murmured, more to herself than to him. A recipe for steel that is self-hardening, that is incredibly light, but has the tensile strength of something that shouldn't exist. My grandfather said the secret was lost when the last mine for the dragon's tooth was buried in an earthquake centuries ago. Suddenly she looked up, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. Oh my God! What is it? Croft asked, his heart pounding. Thorn. He said his team acquired it from a defunct mining operation in Jordan. He doesn't just have the formula, Mr. Croft. He has the source. He has the dragon's tooth. He just doesn't know what to do with it. He thinks the value is in the text, in the formula. She looked at him, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. He's like a man who found a map to a gold mine and is trying to sell the map, not realizing he's standing on top of the gold. Julian Croft felt a surge of adrenaline he hadn't experienced since he was a young man first walking the factory floor with his father. Thorne's arrogance, his tech-centric worldview, was his greatest weakness. He saw the journal as code to be cracked, not as a physical recipe for a tangible substance. So what do we do? Croft asked, the question forming a bond between them. It was no longer his problem. It was our problem. Clara took a deep breath, the waitress receding completely, the artisan, the guardian, taking her place. She pushed the napkin across the table. First, you need to understand that this isn't something you can replicate in a modern lab overnight. You can't just throw these elements into an electric arc furnace. The journal describes a specific process of folding the metal, of temperature controls guided by the color of the flame, not by a digital thermostat. It's as much an art as it is a science. She stood up and began to pace the small room, her mind racing. Thorne has the map, and he has the gold. But we have the one thing he doesn't. We have the language. We know how to read the map. He'll never sell me the journal or the mineral samples now, Croft said, thinking aloud. Not after I threw him out. He'll double down, hire more experts. He'll brute force it. Let him, Clara said, a sharp, dangerous glint in her eye. He can have all the linguists in the world. They'll translate the words, but they won't understand the meaning. They'll see quench in the heart of winter, and they'll write down cool rapidly. They won't understand it means a precisely timed brine bath of a specific salinity. He'll waste months, maybe years, and millions of dollars turning out brittle, useless junk. She stopped pacing and turned to him, her plan forming in real time. We don't go after the journal. We go after the source. You're Croft Industries. You have geologists, surveyors. Thorne mentioned a defunct mining operation in Jordan. There can't be that many. We find that mine. We acquire the rights to it. We don't need his single page of the map, Mr. Croft. We'll buy the whole territory it leads to. It was an audacious, brilliant strategy, a flank attack of staggering simplicity. While Thorne was focused on the prize in his hand, they would seize the ground from under his feet. It would take weeks to identify the location, to negotiate the rights, Croft began, the practical obstacles rising up. Then you'd better get started, Clara said. And in the meantime, we need to create a new page of the map, one that leads him in the wrong direction. What do you mean? A slow, cunning smile spread across Clara's face, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. It transformed her tired features into something striking and formidable. Mr. Thorne thinks you're desperate, so we're going to give him what he wants. We're going to reopen negotiations for the merger. What? After all this? I'd rather burn the company to the ground. You're not going to accept the merger, she explained, her voice low and conspiratorial. You're going to counteroffer. You'll offer him a joint venture, a partnership to develop this new alloy. You'll provide the industrial muscle. He'll provide the research materials, the journal, and his mineral samples. You'll tell him you have a consultant who has made a partial breakthrough. You, Croft breathed, seeing the shape of her plan. Me, she confirmed. And my breakthrough will be a carefully constructed, technically plausible, but utterly flawed translation of that first page. It will send his engineers down a rabbit hole so deep they'll need a search party to find their way out. It will confirm all their biases about old-world techniques being inefficient. It will keep him busy, burning his cash and his time, while your people are on a plane to Ammon. Julian Croft stared at her. He had spent the last 5 years in boardrooms with the sharpest minds in the industry, men and women who wielded billion-dollar budgets and complex algorithms. None of them possessed the kind of innate, visceral strategic brilliance this young woman was displaying. She wasn't just a translator. She was a master smith, and her forge was the human mind, her hammer was language, and the steel she was shaping was the future of his company. There's one more thing, Clara said, her voice turning serious. She picked up the pendant from her neck, holding it in her palm. This isn't just about saving your company, Mr. Croft. This is about reclaiming my family's legacy. If this works, when this works, I don't want a consultant's fee. I want a laboratory. I want the resources to truly resurrect my family's art. I want to establish the Hadid name, not as a historical footnote, but as a leader in materials science. She looked him in the eye, her gaze unwavering. I want a partnership. A real one. For the first time in a decade, Julian Croft felt the thrill of building something new, rather than the crushing weight of preserving something old. He was looking at the future, and it was a 24-year-old waitress with calloused hands and the soul of an ancient artisan. He extended his own hand across the table. You'll have your lab, Ms. Hadid, he said, the honorific feeling more natural than it ever had with any CEO. Let's go forge a future. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated deception. Julian Croft, playing the part of a beaten man, reached out to Marcus Thorne. As Clara predicted, Thorne was arrogant in his victory, eager to gloat. He agreed to a meeting at the Croft Industries headquarters, a sprawling, old-fashioned campus of brick buildings that Thorne openly sneered at as a factory museum. Clara did not attend the meeting. Instead, she sat in a small, windowless office down the hall, a place normally used by junior accountants. In front of her was a high-resolution photograph of Thorne's tablet that Croft had discreetly taken before their confrontation. For hours she worked, not on a translation, but on a piece of fiction, a masterpiece of misdirection. She took the core concepts from the text, the nickel-infused ore, the anthracite coal, the mysterious catalyst, and wove them into a process that was almost right. It was seductively close to the truth, filled with authentic terminology and plausible steps. She changed the quenching medium from brine to oil, a common technique in modern metallurgy that, in this specific case, would create a hopelessly brittle final product. She altered the heating cycles, adding a step that would seem logical to a modern engineer, but would disrupt the crystalline alignment. She described the dragon's tooth not as a catalyst, but as a simple binding agent, suggesting it be added at the end of the process, rendering it inert. It was a perfect trap, disguised as a key. She wrote it all out on a single sheet of paper, her English clear and concise, her Aramaic flawless. She titled it Preliminary Analysis and Process Hypothesis. Meanwhile, Croft's best geological team, 2 veteran engineers he'd pulled out of semi-retirement, who still believed in instinct and fieldwork over satellite imagery, were on a Gulf Stream jet bound for Jordan. Their mission, to investigate every decommissioned mine in the Gilead mountain region, looking for signs of a rare, uncatalogued mineral deposit. The meeting between Croft and Thorne took place in the main boardroom, a cavernous room dominated by a massive oak table and portraits of Julian's father and grandfather. Croft, coached by Clara, played his part to perfection. He was subdued, weary, a man who had accepted the inevitable. "All right, Thorne," he sighed, pushing a proposal across the table. "A joint venture, the Project Hadid alloy. We split it 70-30. 70-30? Thorne laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Julian. I have the source material. It's 90-10, my way." "The source material is useless without the translation," Croft countered, sliding Clara's single-page analysis across the table. "My consultant, the Waitress, if you must know. She's a prodigy of some sort, descended from the original Smiths. This is what she's deciphered so far. It's a starting point." Thorne snatched the paper. He read it, his eyes scanning the technical details. His own engineers had suggested similar, though less detailed, processes. The mention of oil quenching and the specific heating cycles resonated with their own failed experiments. It felt like the missing piece of the puzzle. It confirmed his belief that technology and modern methods could solve this ancient riddle. The idea that the key was a simple binding agent was an elegant, simple solution that appealed to his tech bro sensibilities. "This is it?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "This is all she has?" "She's working on the rest," Croft lied smoothly. "But she's eccentric. She'll only work if she feels her family's legacy is being honored. A joint venture is the only way she'll cooperate. 80-20. That's my final offer. And Croft Industries gets led on production." Thorne was hooked. He saw a clear path to victory. He would get the full translation, control the patent, and eventually swallow Croft's production facilities whole. He would be the man who single-handedly revolutionized materials science. "Fine," Thorne sneered, a triumphant smirk on his face. 80-20. Send your girl the rest of the scans. I want a full process document by the end of the week. The trap was set. For the next 2 weeks, the world of Croft Industries was split in 2. Publicly, a team of engineers began a high-profile collaboration with Thorne's tech group, dutifully following the flawed instructions Clara had provided. They built a small-scale pilot forge, held daily video conference. The 2 weeks that followed were a symphony of calculated chaos, played on 2 vastly different stages. On the public stage, under the humming fluorescent lights of a newly leased R&D space, Marcus Thorne's engineers and a select group from Croft Industries engaged in a farcical ballet of failure. They followed Clara's meticulously flawed instructions, a siren song of almost truth that led them onto the rocks of metallurgical impossibility. They produced ingot after ingot of useless, brittle slag, each failure documented in exhaustive reports that Thorne consumed with mounting fury. He saw conspiracy and incompetence in every cracked sample, firing 2 of his own lead scientists and sending scathing emails to Julian, blaming the antediluvian mindset of Croft's team. He never once suspected the map itself was the lie. The second stage was a world away, hidden in the forgotten heart of Croft's oldest Chicago plant. It was a cavernous, cathedral-like space known as Forge 7, decommissioned for 30 years, a ghost of the company's Gilded Age glory. Here there was no hum of computers, only the primal sounds of creation, the rhythmic sigh of a massive, restored leather bellows, the hungry roar of a coal fire, and the percussive clang of hammer on steel. Clara, her waitress uniform, traded for a heavy leather apron, scarred with burn marks and a pair of goggles pushed up on her forehead, moved through the heat haze like a high priestess. Her congregation consisted of 3 men, the last of a dying breed, whom Julian had personally pulled from retirement. There was Sal, a master machinist whose hands could feel 1,000th of an inch tolerance. Abe, a welder who spoke of metal stresses as if they were human emotions. And Piotr, a Polish refugee who had learned the art of the forge at his father's side before the war. They were men of instinct and feel, men whose knowledge resided in their muscles and nerves, not on a hard drive. At first, they were skeptical of this young woman, this girl from the front of the house, but their skepticism melted away in the searing heat of her expertise. She didn't command them. She taught them. She showed them how to read the soul of the fire, judging its temperature not by a pyrometer, but by its color, from the deep cherry of the initial heating to the blinding white-yellow of a welding heat. She taught them the language of the steel as it was worked, the subtle shift in the ring of the hammer that spoke of its internal structure changing. She worked alongside them, her hands, once calloused from carrying trays, now becoming calloused from the forge tongs and hammer handle. In the evenings, she would sit with them, sharing coffee from a dented thermos, and they would trade stories, their tales of the factory floor, her stories of her grandfather's workshop, of a lineage stretching back through the smoke of centuries. A bond was forged between them, stronger than any alloy Thorne's team could ever dream of creating. Julian spent most of his time there, a silent, watchful presence. He was a king in exile, his public kingdom engaged in a pantomime of surrender, while his true power was being secretly reforged. He watched Clara, and in her he saw the ghost of his own grandfather, the same obsessive focus, the same reverence for the material, the same innate understanding that true creation was an act of collaboration with fire and iron, not a conquest of them. He was shedding the skin of the CEO, the man of balance sheets and quarterly reports, and rediscovering the soul of the builder he had once been. The anxiety that had gnawed at him for years began to recede, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating hope. He was betting his entire family legacy on the hands of a 24-year-old woman and 3 old men in a forgotten room. And he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, as Clara and Piotr were wresting a glowing billet of steel from the forge, Julian's satellite phone rang. It was a shrill, alien sound in the analog world of Forge 7. He stepped into a quiet alcove, the roar of the fire a distant thunder. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, his lead geologist in Jordan, no relation to Marcus, a fact Julian had confirmed 3 times. "We found it, Mr. Croft." Aris's voice was crackling with static and excitement. "It wasn't on any modern survey, but we unearthed an old British mandate map, a geological survey from the 1920s. The area was marked Dragon's Tooth Quarry. A local guide told us the name came from the sharp, dark rocks that littered the ground, The British surveyors noted it was mineralogically uninteresting, but geologically unstable. They told people to stay away. Julian's knuckles were white as he gripped the phone. And the uninteresting rock is a near pure vein of the sample we were given. It's not just a deposit, sir. It's the whole damned mountain. The land is state-owned, considered worthless. It's scheduled for a low-bid auction next month for gravel rights. It's not going to auction, Julian said, his voice low and hard. He felt a surge of adrenaline that was cold and pure. Keep your team there. Maintain absolute radio silence. I'll handle the rest. He ended the call and walked back into the main forge area. The hammering had stopped. Clara, Sal, Abe, and Piotr were watching him, their faces grimy with soot, their eyes questioning. They found it, Julian said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. A collective breath was released. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, her hand instinctively going to the Hadid pendant at her neck. It was a silent prayer of thanks to the ancestors who had guided them here. Julian moved with a speed and ruthlessness that had made his grandfather a legend. He leveraged every political and financial chit he had accumulated over a lifetime. He didn't just make an offer for the mining rights. He proposed a strategic partnership with the Jordanian government. He promised to build a world-class materials science institute in Amman to train a new generation of Jordanian engineers, to share patents for all non-military applications. He framed it not as a purchase, but as an investment in their future. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. While Marcus Thorne was still analyzing data from his latest failed experiment, the deal was signed in a quiet ceremony at the Royal Palace. Croft Industries, and by extension, Clara Hadid, now controlled the entire known supply of Shinantura on Earth. A week later, a diplomatic crate arrived at a private airfield outside Chicago. Inside, nestled in foam and surrounded by security sensors, were 100 pounds of the catalyst. Clara lifted a piece from the crate. It was jagged, dark, and strangely dense, absorbing the light around it, cool and solid in her palm. It felt like holding a piece of the night sky. It felt like a reunion. "It's time," she said to Julian, her voice resonating with the weight of 2,000 years of anticipation. He nodded, his face grim with purpose. "Show us the way, Ms. Hadid." The final forging was a ritual. They worked through the night, the only light coming from the incandescent heart of the forge. Clara didn't consult notes. The knowledge was in her, a river flowing from a deep, ancestral well. She directed the process with a quiet, confident economy of words. The tears of the mountain, the nickel-rich iron ore Julian had sourced from a proprietary mine in Michigan, the breath of the sleeping stone, anthracite coal that burned with a clean, almost invisible blue flame. And now, the dragon's tooth. She showed Sal how to crush the catalyst into a fine powder, which she then mixed with a flux of her own creation, using ingredients that made the old men raise their eyebrows: borax, silica, and something that smelled faintly of bone ash. She didn't add it at the end, as her fake recipe had suggested. She integrated it into the very first stage, layering it between the folded billets of steel in the Japanese sanmai wetfie style. "It doesn't bind the steel," she explained, her voice low and intense over the roar of the fire. "It transforms it. It teaches the carbon how to align. It gives the steel its soul." For hours they worked the metal, heating, hammering, folding, heating, hammering, folding. The billet was folded upon itself 12 times, creating over 8,000 layers of steel and catalyst, a microscopic tapestry of strength and resilience. Clara's hammer strikes were different from Piotr's powerful blows. They were lighter, faster, seeming to listen to the metal, coaxing it into shape rather than beating it into submission. The steel began to sing under her hammer, a high, clear note that vibrated through the floor. Finally, as the first hint of dawn touched the high, grimy windows of Forge 7, it was ready. The blade, long, slender, and featureless, glowed with a light that seemed to come from within, the color of the setting sun. "The quenching," Clara whispered, her face beaded with sweat, her eyes reflecting the fire. "The heart of winter." Abe wheeled over a long, narrow trough, filled with a murky brine she had spent a day preparing. It was chilled to near freezing. "Everything depends on this moment," she said to Julian, who stood mesmerized. "Too fast, it shatters. Too slow, it's just a piece of metal." She took the glowing blade with a pair of long tongs. For a moment, she held it aloft, a sliver of captured daylight in the smoky darkness. She closed her eyes, and her lips moved, reciting an ancient Aramaic blessing, a prayer to the fire and the iron. Then, with a smooth, decisive motion, she plunged the blade into the brine. The sound was not the violent hiss of normal quenching. It was a deep, resonant thrum, like a plucked cello string, that seemed to hang in the air for a full 10 seconds. A column of steam erupted, smelling of salt and ozone. When it cleared, the blade was transformed. It was no longer glowing. It was a deep, matte black, seeming to swallow the very light around it. For the next 2 days, she polished it. Using progressively finer stones and abrasive powders, she revealed the steel's inner life. A pattern emerged on the surface, a swirling, hypnotic dance of light and shadow, like oil on water or storm clouds gathering at dusk. It was the legendary Damascus pattern, but with a clarity and depth none of them had ever seen. It was the story of the steel, written on its own skin. The final confrontation was set for the following evening. Back at the Forge restaurant, back in the Crucible room. Julian had summoned Marcus Thorne with a single, curt message. Final signing. My terms. Thorne arrived, radiating an aura of contemptuous victory. He saw Julian standing by the table and smirked. "Took you long enough to come to your senses, Julian. Ready to hand over the keys to the museum?" "Not quite," Julian said, his voice unnervingly calm. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Clara was sitting there. She wasn't the waitress. She wasn't the smith in her leather apron. She was a third person, a synthesis of the two. She wore a tailored charcoal grey suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her hands, clean but still bearing the faint tracery of calluses, were folded on the table. Her stillness was absolute. Between her hands, lying on a simple black velvet cloth, was the blade. Thorne's eyes flicked from Clara to Julian, and then to the blade. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What's this? A little gift to commemorate my victory? A letter opener for my new desk?" "Pick it up," Clara said. Her voice was not the deferential whisper he remembered. It was level, cool, and carried an undeniable weight of command. Annoyed but intrigued, Thorne reached out and picked up the blade. His bravado evaporated. A look of genuine shock replaced it. The blade, for all its visual density, felt almost weightless, like a bird's bone. He ran a thumb cautiously over the swirling pattern. It was unnervingly sharp. "Carbon fiber composite? Some new ceramic?" he stammered, his mind racing through his catalogue of modern materials, finding no match. "That," Julian said, his voice cutting through the silence, "is steel. Forged with the nickel ore your spectrograph registered, but your intellect dismissed. Fired with the anthracite coal, your simulations deemed inefficient. Transformed by the catalyst your team thought was a simple binding agent. It was forged according to the principles you called a relic by the woman you called a waitress." The blood drained from Thorne's face. He looked at the blade, then at Clara, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying speed. The failed tests, the constant delays, Julian's strange calm. It had all been a lie. "My team," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "Your team has been chasing a ghost down a rabbit hole I dug for them," Clara said, her voice devoid of triumph, stating it as a simple fact. "While you were burning millions of dollars trying to decipher a single, deliberately mistranslated page, we were honoring the full text. While you were trying to break a code, we were practicing an art." Julian slid a portfolio across the polished table. The first document is the deed of ownership for the Alkaric mountain range and all mineral rights therein, transferred to Croft Industries by the Kingdom of Jordan. We own the catalyst, all of it. The second is the master patent, filed this morning, for the alloy and its 7-stage production process. The patent cites as prior art the Hadid family journals, dating back to the 3rd century, establishing a chain of intellectual property that predates your company, and indeed, this country, by quite a margin. Thorne stared at the documents, his mind refusing to process the scale of his defeat. The smugness, the arrogance, all of it curdled into a mask of pure, impotent rage. You tricked me. You lying. You deceived yourself, Mr. Thorne. Clara corrected him, her gaze unwavering. Your arrogance was the only tool I needed. You look at the world and see only data to be exploited. You see people and see only functions to be managed. You saw a servant and you missed the smith. You saw a dead language and you missed a living soul. The joint venture is dissolved, Julian stated flatly. There is no deal. There is nothing. Your research is a fraud, and the source of your ambition is now my exclusive property. Thorne snapped. It wasn't a physical lunge. It was a desperate, primal act of intellectual negation. He was a man whose entire identity was built on the idea that the new always destroys the old, that data always trumps art. This blade was an existential threat to him. He had to prove it was a fraud. With a guttural cry, he gripped the blade and swung it with all his force at the corner of the solid granite table. He meant to shatter it, to expose the trick. There was a sound like a rifle shot, a sharp, sickening crack. The blade was unharmed. It didn't have a scratch. It didn't have a nick. It rested in Thorne's trembling hand, the swirling pattern seeming to mock him. But the table, a massive, wedge-shaped chunk of the 2-inch thick granite, had sheared clean off, crashing to the floor and shattering into a dozen pieces. Silence. Thorne stared at the blade, at the broken monument of corporate power, his worldview crumbling with it. He had been defeated not by a superior algorithm or a hostile takeover, but by history, by wisdom, by a truth so old it had become a myth. He was a footnote in a story he thought he was writing. "Get out," Julian said, his voice a low growl of finality. "And Marcus, if your name is ever mentioned in the same breath as mine, or Ms. Hadid's, or this company's again, I will use the full weight of my resources to expose your fraudulent research practices to every regulatory body and investor you have. We will unmake you." Thorne dropped the blade as if it had burned him. It clattered softly on the velvet cloth. He stumbled backward, his face pale and slack, and fled the room, leaving the wreckage of his ambition on the floor. Julian looked at Clara, then at the blade, perfect and impossible, lying amidst the ruin. He had saved his company, but he knew it was more than that. He had witnessed the resurrection of something sacred. He picked up the blade, feeling its impossible balance. "So," he said, a slow, wondering smile spreading across his face, "what do we build now?" 1 year later. The building was the new heart of the Croft campus, a stunning fusion of reclaimed 19th century brick and soaring glass walls. The name was etched in simple, elegant steel letters above the entrance: the Hadid Institute for Applied Metallurgy. Inside, there was no separation between the old and the new. In one room, PhDs in materials science operated scanning electron microscopes, mapping the crystalline structures of the new alloys. In the room next to it, separated by a wall of reinforced glass, a new generation of apprentices, mentored by Sal, Abe, and Piotr, learned to read the color of the flame in a state-of-the-art clean forge. It was a place of dialogue between worlds. Julian Croft was a man remade. He had ceded the day-to-day operations of Croft Industries to a trusted successor. He spent his days at the Institute, not as an executive, but as its chairman and primary benefactor. He was no longer preserving a legacy. He was participating in the creation of a new one. He found more joy in debating the finer points of quenching temperatures with Clara than he ever had in closing a billion-dollar deal. Clara stood in her office, which overlooked the main laboratory floor. She was no longer just Clara the Smith. The world was beginning to know her as Dr. Hadid after the Institute had fast-tracked the completion of her doctorate, recognizing her unparalleled practical knowledge as more than sufficient. But she rarely used the title. The name that mattered was Hadid. She looked down at her hands. The calluses were still there, a permanent map of her journey. She thought of the endless nights at the forge, the ache in her bones, the weight of her grief. They were not scars she wished to erase. They were the pressures that had forged her. On her desk lay two objects. One was her grandfather's worn leather satchel, containing his tools and the few journals she had left. The other was the first official product created by the Institute. It was a surgical scalpel. Its blade was a single, flawless piece of Hadid steel, thinner than a human hair at its edge, yet incapable of dulling. Julian walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on her desk and looked at the scalpel. He would have liked this, Julian said quietly. He dreamed of it, Clara replied, her voice soft. He always said the ultimate purpose of a perfect blade was not to cut, but to heal, to mend what is broken. She picked up the scalpel, its lightness still a marvel. We have so much work to do. This metal, in aerospace, in medicine, in construction, it could change everything. It's a great power, Julian, and a great responsibility. A responsibility we share, he affirmed. He looked from her face to the sprawling campus outside the window, a bridge between past and future. You know, the first proverb you ever translated for me. The smoke tells the story of the steel. I remember, she said. I think I finally understand it, he continued, his gaze thoughtful. Everyone sees the final product, the strong, polished steel. But the real story, the story of the struggle, the fire, the pressure, the impurities that were burned away, that's all in the smoke. It's the part that vanishes. But it's the most important part of the story. Clara looked at him and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. She thought of the smoke of her grandfather's forge, the steam of the quenching bucket, the exhaust fumes from the L train, the haze of a busy restaurant kitchen. All of it had been part of the story. All of it had been necessary. The billionaire had seen a waitress. He had demanded she read a language he could not comprehend, never knowing he was speaking to its last guardian. He thought he was issuing a challenge. He never realized he was offering a key, unlocking a legacy of fire and intellect that had slept for generations, waiting for the right moment, the right pressure, and the right hands to finally bring its story into the light.